August 14th, 1969. Small's Paradise, Harlem, midnight. The heat that Thursday night made everything dangerous. 90 degrees at 10 p.m., humidity thick enough to choke on. The kind of weather that turns small arguments into bloodshed. Small's Paradise sat at 7th and 135th. Red brick, neon sign buzzing. Best jazz club in Harlem during regular hours. But tonight, the doors were locked. Wallace stood outside, 6'2", 240, scar running ear to collarbone from a throat-cutting attempt in '56. He'd worked security for Bumpy Johnson 22 years. A young couple approached at 11:15. "We have a reservation." Wallace shook his head. "Closed, but we called." "Closed." They left. The woman looked back once. She had no idea what she'd missed. Or maybe she was lucky. Inside, 200 men sat under amber lights. Every major dealer in Harlem, Clayton Rivers, dealing since '52, Jerome Walsh, ran numbers in the Bronx. Big Tommy Morrison, 300 pounds, beat a man to death with a telephone once. Raymond Quick Johnson moved 10 kilos in a weekend. Cigarette smoke hung like fog. Bourbon on every table. Power concentrated in one room. Nicky Barnes sat center table, closest to the stage. Cream suit, $3,000. Diamond rings. Gold Rolex. Hair processed perfect. He looked like a king. Barnes had been Bumpy Johnson's protege for a decade. When Bumpy died 13 months ago, everyone assumed Barnes would take the throne. He had the Italian connections, the experience, the infrastructure. But Frank Lucas walked into Bumpy's funeral with 100,000 cash and placed it in the casket, declared himself king, made it stick. For 13 months, Frank built an empire that made Barnes look amateur. Frank's product, Blue Magic, was 98% pure. The Mafia's best heroin was 6%. Frank sold cheaper and made 10 times the profit. Nobody knew his source. Barnes was losing territory every week. His pride couldn't take it. Tonight would fix that. Barnes had 60 dealers pledged to his side, men who swore they'd cut Frank off completely. Tonight was Barnes' coronation, the moment he'd put Frank back in his place. At 11:53, the back door opened. Frank Lucas walked in. Simple black suit, white shirt, thin black tie, no jewelry, no flash. He looked like an accountant. Many details of this era were never officially recorded. If stories like this interest you, feel free to subscribe and stay with us. But every conversation stopped. 200 heads turned. Frank's brother Huey followed, 6'3", 260, pure muscle, eyes scanning exits, counting threats. Frank walked to the back corner, farthest table, near the exit. Clear sight lines. He sat, adjusted his chair, settled in. A waitress approached, nervous. "Can I get you something, Mr. Lucas?" "Bourbon." "Neat." She disappeared fast. Frank didn't look at Barnes, just sat perfectly still, hands folded, waiting. Barnes watched, smiling. The smile of a man watching his trap close. At exactly midnight, Barnes stood. The jazz trio stopped playing. Silence fell like a hammer. Barnes walked to the stage, cream suit catching light, rings sparkling. He looked like power. He stood at the microphone. Let the moment breathe. "Gentlemen," Barnes began, voice smooth. "Thank you for coming. Some traveled from Brooklyn, the Bronx, Jersey. That shows respect." Men nodded. Some applauded lightly. "You know we're here because there's been confusion. When Bumpy died, he left a vacuum. People started asking, who's in charge? Who runs what?" Barnes paused. Some people thought they could step in and claim what Bumpy built. Thought they could walk into a funeral with cash and buy respect. Thought they could play king without earning it, without bleeding for it. Frank sipped his bourbon, face showing nothing. Barnes stared directly at Frank now. "But you can't buy loyalty. Can't buy reputation. Can't buy the kind of respect that takes decades to build. Bumpy didn't spend 40 years building an empire just to leave it to some driver from North Carolina who never ran a crew, never did real time, never put in actual work." The room went electric. Everyone knew who Barnes meant. "Bumpy left his empire to me," Barnes declared. "I'm the one he trained, the one he trusted, the one with Italian connections that keep product flowing, the one with political protection, the infrastructure, the experience." Barnes spread his arms wide. "Starting tonight, we go back to the way things were. Clear hierarchy, clear rules, clear leadership." Someone shouted, "What about Frank?" Barnes smiled wider. "What about Frank?" Frank Lucas is doing what he's always done, running errands, driving cars, playing pretend, but tonight, that ends. He pointed at Frank. Stand up, Frank. Stand up so everyone can see you. Frank didn't move, sat perfectly still, bourbon glass in hand. I said stand up, Barnes repeated, louder. Or are you scared? Frank set his glass down gently, then stood, slowly, deliberately. Every eye tracked him. Barnes nodded. There he is. Bumpy's driver. The man who thinks he's a king because he threw some money in a casket. Barnes' crew laughed. Let me tell you about Frank Lucas, Barnes continued, dripping contempt. This man is not a gangster. He's a coward. He hides behind Bumpy's name, hides behind that funeral stunt. But when it comes to real power, what does he do? Barnes pointed at Frank's corner position. He sits in the back, near the exit, like a scared child, like someone who knows he doesn't belong. The insult was deliberate, public. Frank doesn't have the stomach for this business. Never did. That's why Bumpy kept him as a driver instead of making him a lieutenant, because Bumpy knew Frank didn't have what it takes, didn't have the vision, didn't have the balls. Barnes paced the stage, working himself up. So, here's how this works. Everyone dealing with Frank, that ends tonight. You come to me, you pay me, you work for me. He turned back to Frank. And you, Frank, you go back to North Carolina, or you work for me like you worked for Bumpy, carrying bags, opening doors, staying quiet, because that's all you've ever been. The help, not the boss. Just the help. That's all you'll ever be. The words landed like punches. Public humiliation in front of 200 witnesses. The room went silent. You could hear men breathing. Frank stood for a long moment, not moving, not speaking, absorbing it. Then Frank started walking toward the stage. Not fast, not slow, just steady steps, face showing nothing. The crowd parted. Men put hands inside jackets, near weapons. Huey's hand moved inside his jacket. Every enforcer noticed. Frank walked to the stage base, looked up at Barnes. You finished? Frank's voice was quiet. Barnes leaned toward the mic, confident. Yeah, Frank, you got something to say? Frank reached inside his jacket. The room tensed. 200 men held their breath. Frank pulled out an envelope. Manila, unsealed. He tossed it onto the stage. It landed at Barnes' feet. Read it. Barnes picked it up, pulled out photographs, documents. His face went white, hands shaking. You want to tell them? Frank asked. Or should I? Barnes looked up, fear in his eyes. This is fake, he said weakly. Frank turned to the room. What Nicky is holding are FBI surveillance photographs. 12 of them. They show Nicky Barnes meeting with federal agents, accepting money, providing information. The papers are payment records from the FBI's confidential informant fund. Asset CI 137. That's Nicky's code. The room erupted. Men shouting. Rat echoing. Frank raised his hand. The room quieted. Third photograph. March 7th, 1967. An FBI field office. Federal Plaza. You're shaking hands with Agent Dennis McCarthy. He's giving you an envelope. Both faces clear. Frank continued. McCarthy ran Organized Crime Task Force 8 years. Retired last month. Gave me these files personally. Said he was tired of protecting rats. The Bureau made a deal with Nicky in '65 after catching him with 20 kilos. Deal was Nicky walks free, keeps operating, feeds them information. Every dealer arrested while Nicky walked clean. Nicky gave them up. Clayton climbed onto the stage, picked up a photograph, studied it. This is you, Clayton said to Barnes. It's fake. I know McCarthy's face. Got me 5 years in '61. This is McCarthy. This is you, shaking his hand. Other dealers grabbed photos, passing them around, evidence spreading. Barnes looked at Frank with hatred. You set me up. No, Frank said simply. You set yourself up 4 years ago. I just found out. Bumpy knew, told me where to look, told me when you made your move. I'd have what I needed to end you. Barnes sat down hard on the stage. Frank addressed the room. Everyone takes a copy home. You see every name Nicky gave the FBI. Some of your names are there. Your friends, your crew, all arrested because Nicky sold them out. He paused. Then you choose. Work with a rat who'll sell you out, or work with me, a man who just gave you the truth. I could have used this privately, could have blackmailed Nicky, but I brought it here, showed all of you, because I believe in transparency, in loyalty. Clayton spoke. What do you want, Frank? Supply you with the best product at the best price. Build something that belongs to us. To Harlem. What about Nicky? Frank looked at Barnes. Nicky is finished. He can leave town or stay and hope the Italians don't find out he's been informing on them too. But as of tonight, nobody works with Nicky Barnes. He's a ghost. Frank walked toward the exit. Huey followed. At the door, Clayton called, "You got my business, Frank, and my respect." Other voices joined. Dealers standing, 60% of the room. Frank nodded once, walked out. Behind him, Nicky Barnes sat alone in his $3,000 suit, surrounded by 200 men who now knew what he was. By morning, every dealer in 5 boroughs knew. Nicky Barnes was a federal informant. Barnes' crew evaporated within 48 hours. The Italian families heard within a week. Carlo Gambino decided Nicky Barnes was no longer under mob protection, death sentence. Barnes went into hiding, moved every few weeks, lived paranoid. Frank consolidated power. Blue Magic went from 60 to 85% market share in 3 months. By end of 1969, Frank Lucas was making $1 million a week. He stayed quiet, no flash, learned from Barnes' mistake. 3 years later, Barnes came out of hiding, couldn't stand being nobody. His identity was built on being seen. 3 years broke him. He rebuilt small, young dealers who didn't know the history. In 1978, DEA arrested him. Life in prison without parole. Barnes became a federal witness, testified against everyone, sent dozens to prison. The government gave him witness protection. New identity. Nicky Barnes, who wanted more than anything to be famous, spent his last decades as nobody, hiding under a name his children didn't know. He died in 2012. New York Times ran his obituary in 2019. 7 years late. Brief, cold, but in Harlem, people remembered. Years later, a reporter asked Frank, "Do you regret what you did to Nicky Barnes?" Frank thought about it. No, Nicky was always going to fall. Too hungry for attention, too desperate to be famous. In this business, that's a death sentence. I didn't destroy Nicky Barnes. I showed people who he already was. But you ended his career, his life. Frank shook his head. I ended his lie. Nicky spent years pretending to be loyal while informing to the FBI. I gave people the truth. What they did with it was their choice. Would you do it differently? Frank smiled that cold smile. The only thing I'd do differently is expose him sooner. Every day Nicky operated as an informant. He put other men's lives at risk. Every day he pretended to be loyal. He destroyed the trust that holds this business together. So no, I don't regret ending Nicky Barnes. I regret not ending him the moment I found out what he was. The reporter published that. Somewhere in witness protection, Nicky Barnes probably read it and remembered. Remembered standing on a stage in Small's Paradise. Remembered calling Frank Lucas a coward. Remembered the manila envelope landing at his feet. Remembered 200 faces turning toward him with understanding and hatred. Remembered the moment his world ended. Not with violence. Not with bullets. With truth. The most devastating weapon of all. August 14th, 1969. Nicky Barnes stood on a stage and called Frank Lucas a coward. He thought he was taking power. Thought he was claiming a throne. But Frank had already won. He'd won weeks earlier when he confirmed Barnes was an informant. Won when he made copies of those photographs. Won when he decided to bring them to the summit instead of using them privately. The summit wasn't Frank taking power. It was Frank revealing he already had it. The envelope wasn't a weapon. It was proof. Proof that Frank Lucas operated on a different level. Proof that underestimating the quiet man was the last mistake you'd ever make. Barnes called Frank a coward and thought it would destroy him. Instead, it destroyed Barnes. Frank walked out of that club the same way he walked in. Calm, controlled, inevitable. The only difference was that now, everyone knew it. If you enjoyed this story, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications for future stories and let us know where you're watching from.